Legendary singer and New Orleans native Clarence Frogman Henry passed away last night.
At just 19 years old, his mix of soulful vocals and humor redefined rock and roll music in the 50s.
Here's a look at Frogman's career with former WWL Louisiana anchor Angela Hill.
Weeks after Hurricane Ida, we discovered a New Orleans music icon, Clarence Frogman Henry, was living in his damaged, mold-filled home.
New Orleans mourns the death of musician Clarence Frogman Henry.
Sabrina Wilson has more on his legacy.
Clarence Frogman Henry once made all of America laugh with his one-of-a-kind frog-like voice, and then cry with the soulful melodies of songs like But I Do. He once opened for the Beatles, stood on the grandest stages across the country, and was considered the living soul of New Orleans R&B for nearly 7 decades. Yet when the spotlight dimmed, Clarence's life resembled a sorrowful tune filled with minor notes. Few knew he went through 7 broken marriages, fathered 10 children, yet spent most of his later years alone. In his final years, he retreated to a small villa by Lake Pontchartrain, a place ravaged first by Hurricane Katrina and later battered again by Hurricane Ida. Rotten walls, a punctured tin roof, warped wooden floors were all that remained of the place where he lived quietly until his last day. And what shocked all of New Orleans was the fact that Clarence passed away on the exact day of his 87th birthday. But that was only the surface of the story, because behind the door of that house lay a secret that had never been revealed. If you ever swayed along to Ain't Got No Home, don't look away now, because today's story will take you back into that abandoned villa to recount the tragic final chapter of Clarence Frogman Henry's life. 68 years after Ain't Got No Home catapulted Clarence Frogman Henry to stardom, people stepped inside the villa where he had lived in seclusion for decades. And guess what they found first? It wasn't music, nor was it glory. It was a chilling emptiness behind a wall, hiding a secret the artist had never shared with anyone. On the late afternoon of April 18, 2024, exactly 68 years since Ain't Got No Home made Clarence Frogman Henry a household name across America, winds from Lake Pontchartrain swept through the withered trees in front of a small house nestled on the outskirts of the city. The rotting wooden gate stood ajar, as if someone had just left or was waiting for someone to return. This had once been his final sanctuary, an old 2-story home on a plot of over 3,000 square feet, purchased by Clarence in 1964 for just $14,500. It was not luxurious, not grand, but to him, it was the place to quietly grow old after the stage lights dimmed. The house had 3 bedrooms, a music room with dark wooden floors, a small living room that opened to a balcony facing the lake, and an unused attic. On the wall beside the staircase still hung an old faded photo of him sitting with Paul McCartney and John Lennon, its edges peeling, the wooden frame scratched as if it had fallen and been hastily rehung. Inside, the floor creaked under every step, and the breeze blew through thin, frayed curtains. In the living room, an armchair lay tipped over next to a crooked old wooden suitcase on a discolored rug. When they opened the suitcase, they found handwritten sheet music never recorded, scrawled ink, smudged lines, as if written during a stormy night or a moment of despair. At the end of the ground floor hallway was the music room, a space that always remained locked. Those who had been inside said the walls were covered with old photos from Clarence's stage days, backstage shots, performance pictures, and even handwritten notes resembling diary entries. Just above the piano, which had several broken keys, was a nearly faded message etched in time: "Never be silent." Rumors had long spread that Clarence hid his original copyright contract behind the wooden wall next to the piano. But after his death, that wall was found hollowed out from the inside. No documents, no originals, nothing left to prove what once belonged to him. Only a cold, empty space and a room that time had forgotten. The night before he died, neighbors said they heard faint piano sounds coming from the second floor, though Clarence had been bedridden for weeks. After that night, there was silence. The house fell into stillness, as if it had never existed. And in that eerie silence, people still ask, what could that hollow wall in the villa reveal about the twisted life of this artist? Let's begin with a childhood riddled with bullying and oppression, events that will bring tears to your eyes. Clarence Henry was born on March 19, 1937, in a poor riverside neighborhood on the eastern side of New Orleans. He was the only son of a shipbuilder and a homemaker who sold vegetables at open-air markets. He grew up in a damp wooden shack where the sound of passing trains at night couldn't drown out the constant arguments of his neighbors. From the moment he could speak, Clarence's voice was strange. It didn't sound like anyone else's. It wasn't clear and bright like other children's, but raspy, hoarse, as if something was stuck in his throat. And from then on, throughout his childhood, he was called by a name no child wants: the Toad Boy. When Clarence was 8, during the first Mardi Gras festival he was old enough to remember, a group of older kids dragged him into the middle of the street and made him sing like a monster. When he nervously opened his mouth, they all burst into laughter. One of them even stuffed a napkin in his mouth and said, "Choke on that weird voice of yours." From that day on, Clarence never sang at school again. He only made it to 9th grade before dropping out in the middle of the 1952 school year after a music teacher rejected him from the choir for having a voice unfit for a group. Clarence began working as a waiter, a laborer. By night, he played music on the corners of Bourbon Street, where no one asked for credentials or what a proper voice should sound like. He started calling himself Frogman as a way to reclaim the nickname once used to shame him, turning it into a shield. During the sweltering nights of June 1953, Clarence secretly practiced piano in his father's storage shed, filled with scrap wood and the smell of old paint. He had a piano missing 3 keys, bought for $3 from a junkyard. No one taught him how to play. Clarence learned by pressing his ear to the radio, listening to Fats Domino and Louis Jordan, and fumbling through the chords until the sound wasn't wrong anymore. Some nights his fingers bled from practicing too long, but Clarence didn't stop, because when he played, he wasn't the boy mocked for his voice. He was the only one who could make those strange sounds come alive. Then came 1954, when he met the first person who believed in his music. It was an old black man named Mr. Reggie, a former church band drummer. He was the first to tell Clarence, "You were born to be different." But less than a year later, Mr. Reggie died of lung cancer. Clarence was only 17. He stood silently by the coffin and placed inside it a handwritten piece of music, a tune he had planned to perform for the old man at his first show. That show never came, and from that day on, Clarence never let anyone else teach him anything again. One night in 1955, while Clarence was playing piano on a street corner near the Frenchman district, 2 white police officers pulled up in their car and shouted at him. They claimed he was disturbing the peace, even though no one had complained. When he tried to explain, "I'm just playing music," one of the officers laughed and mocked his voice, croaking like a frog. They threw him in the back of the car like a child annoying the city. After keeping him in custody for a few hours, they let him go without an apology. That night, he walked out of the station, shoved his harmonica back into his shirt pocket, and told himself, if they thought his voice was strange, he'd make the whole world remember it. From a child bullied for having a freakish voice, Clarence Frogman Henry turned that very difference into a bridge that led straight to the grand stage. But back then, he didn't know that the mocking laughter of today would become tomorrow's applause, and that in exchange for a voice like no other, he'd have to give up a childhood like no one else's. Just a few months later, in early 1956, Clarence brought his raw demo to Argo Records, a small subsidiary of Chess Records in Chicago. No one expected much, but just a week after its release, the single, Ain't Got No Home, started playing on local radio. Another week passed, and it aired in Atlanta. And within 3 weeks, the song climbed to the top 5 on the Billboard R&B chart and the top 30 nationwide. With a voice that leapt from frog-like growls to falsetto and then plunged into baritone, and a singing style like no one else's, Clarence wasn't just a music phenomenon. He became the media's favorite punchline. They dubbed him the Frogman, broadcast him nonstop on TV, booked him relentlessly across the South. But soon, that very nickname, Frogman, chained him to the image of a novelty act, not a real artist. In 1957, amid a sweeping R&B craze across the country, Clarence Frogman Henry became a sensation. He was paid nearly $2,000 per show, a massive sum at the time, especially for a young black man who once got expelled from school for not affording a uniform. Every time he stepped off stage, the crowd still roared, the lights hadn't even dimmed, and people were already stuffing thick wads of cash into his hands. But as quickly as money came, it disappeared just as fast. Clarence had no accountant, no financial advisor, no one to teach him what to do with the money he earned. All he knew was how to give. If a friend asked to borrow, he said yes. If someone was in trouble, he opened his wallet. Some weeks, he brought home $1,800, but by Friday afternoon, he wouldn't even have $10 left. Once, he covered food and lodging for the entire band during a southern tour. And when everyone retired to their hotel rooms, Clarence quietly walked to a sandwich cart at the end of the street, buying a small roll with the last few coins in his pocket, eating while thinking about his mother, the woman who once went hungry just to feed him. A singer of loneliness who never saved anything for himself. A man who made the world laugh, but couldn't protect his own future. Behind the applause and glittering nights were quiet days when he mentally calculated if he had enough for gas, dinner, and a new suit for the next show. No one expected that the soul of New Orleans R&B never had a proper savings account during the first 30 years of his career. It wasn't wastefulness. It was the result of a heart too honest for a world built on schemes. And that very trait would lead to the hardship that colored the final chapters of his life. Just when everything seemed to rise, his career stalled. In 1964, he was chosen to open for the Beatles on their first U.S. tour. It should have been the moment the world discovered Clarence, but throughout the entire tour, he never appeared in a single promo photo. No name on the posters, no formal introductions. In news articles, he was mentioned with just a single line, a guest performer from New Orleans. One September night in 1962 in Atlanta, Clarence Frogman Henry was invited to perform at a grand gala where upper-class white audiences packed the hall in tailored suits and glittering gowns. On stage, he brought the house to its feet with "But I Do." But backstage, harsh reality waited. Clarence's hotel room was placed on the ground floor right next to the kitchen dumpster, with mildew smells, buzzing insects, and a window that wouldn't lock. Meanwhile, the white musicians he performed with, who were lesser known, stayed upstairs with full amenities. Clarence, ever polite, asked if he could be moved to their floor. He only said, "I need rest too, so I can sing tomorrow." But that simple request became the reason he was dropped from the next show's lineup. The next morning, at the next venue, his name was gone from the performance schedule. The promoter's representative avoided eye contact as he handed him an envelope with exactly $150, then turned and walked away without a word. Clarence was 25, had once shared the stage with the Beatles, had made America laugh and cry, but for asking to be treated like a human being, he lost the stage and lost all respect. And the saddest part? No one stood up for him. Despite releasing over a dozen singles between 1956 and 1965, only 2 ever made the charts. Record labels turned their backs. Promoters called someone else. And Clarence, once a quirky phenomenon that made the nation laugh, slowly faded from the spotlight. No one asked how he was doing. No one noticed he stopped performing weekly. Only he knew the spotlight had never truly shone for him. And only he, each time he stepped into that small music room at the end of the villa hallway, could still hear the voice. Not the frog voice, but the voice of a man who once shouted into the world, "I had a name, I had a song, I was once." After the glory of the early 60s, Clarence began to feel what most artists of his era feared most. His music stopped playing on the radio. As disco, funk, and electronic synth sounds flooded the charts, Clarence's soulful, raw, and sorrowful voice was deemed outdated. He kept composing. Some nights, sleepless, sitting alone in his old music room, tapping out notes on a piano with broken keys. One of those ballads, "But I Do," was unexpectedly selected as a soundtrack for a major film in the early 1970s. He thought it would be his return to recognition, that young audiences would finally know he had once been a cornerstone of American R&B. But even that became a wound that never healed. When But I Do suddenly played in a popular film in the early 1980s, Clarence thought it was the light at the end of the tunnel, the moment the world would remember him again. But the studio never contacted him for permission or paid royalties. Instead, they quietly signed with his old label, the one that had taken control of his entire music catalog through a contract no one had clearly explained. When Clarence went to a lawyer and filed a lawsuit, all he received was a shake of the head, a $1,200 court fee, and the advice, you'd be better off letting it go. And so, he lost the case, bitterly. From that day on, Clarence never spoke about contracts again, as if his voice had been sold and he no longer had the right to ask for it back. In the following years, Clarence lived quietly. Every time a visitor asked to see the music room, he refused. One time, after a house party in 1974, an unreleased recording disappeared from a locked cabinet in the corner. No one knew who took it. No one ever heard it again. And Clarence never let anyone into that room ever again. He began to be called outdated by those who once praised him. Songs born from his flesh and blood, from the memories of a bullied boy and a broken man, were now mocked as a bygone era. Some even called it nursing home music. In 1978, during one final recording session in Baton Rouge, he was kicked out after only 3 songs. The reason noted in the internal report, the voice does not match our modern direction. Clarence didn't argue. He just stood silently outside the studio door for a long moment, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a single comment to the technician dismantling the mic. So, who really fits in my era then? After that day, Clarence never recorded another song. He still played. He still sang. But only in the locked music room at the end of the hall, where his voice no longer echoed through brick walls, but only within himself, a performer once heard by all of America, now lulling himself to sleep with songs no one ever bothered to release. Under the stage lights, Clarence had lost his voice to shadowy contracts. But offstage, what he lost was even more painful. It was love. It was trust. And believe it or not, even after his death, Clarence was still betrayed by the women he once loved. Clarence Frogman Henry had married 7 women, yet not a single one stood by him when he fell ill. His first wife, who loved him in their youth in West Bank, left after 2 years because she couldn't bear the endless touring. The second came during the height of his fame, calling him the spotlight of my life, but eventually left for one simple reason. I'm tired of always being the one in the audience. The third marriage left the deepest wound, a vocal coach who had once encouraged him to return to the studio during a dark time, but later sued him for royalties from But I Do, claiming she inspired it. In court, he only bowed his head and said, I wrote that song after a sleepless night alone. There are wounds that don't bleed but fester until the very end. Clarence once forgave, once believed love could soothe the loneliness the world had left in him. But the loves that followed only brought more bitterness. The fifth wife silently drained their joint bank account and vanished without a trace. The sixth walked out with their child in the middle of a rainy night, without a note, leaving an empty room and an unused crib behind. The most painful was the last, a woman nearly 30 years younger who had lived with him in the lakeside villa. Clarence had believed, had hoped, she would be the one to stay until the end. But when he was hospitalized for post-surgery complications, she quietly filed to transfer the house into her name, locked up the music room, and cut all contact. Clarence died just weeks later, alone. No candles, no flowers, no arms to hold him. Only a cold fax stating, request for full authority over estate due to lack of legal kin. And just like that, a man who once made America laugh, cry, and sing along left the world as if no one had ever truly loved him. Worse than the betrayal in love was the moment Clarence Frogman Henry, a man who once had all of America singing along, became a stranger to the very family he had created. He had 10 children with 7 women, yet most of them never stayed long. One son once appeared on a local TV station, looked straight into the camera, and said coldly, "He's a famous name, not a father." No remorse, no tears, just a brutal denial that erased an entire lifetime Clarence had tried to preserve for his children. His eldest daughter, upon hearing that one of his old albums was being reissued, immediately sent a letter demanding a share of the royalties. But when the hospital called to inform her Clarence had died and someone needed to claim his ashes, she didn't pick up. The lawyer dialed every heir listed, again and again. No one responded. No one came for what was left of his estate. No one attended his funeral. Not a single word of farewell. Clarence was cremated under the Louisiana State Protocol for individuals without legally confirmed next of kin. His death, though once a piece of America's musical memory, was treated like just another case no one cared about. Mention Clarence's death and you'll see people wince in sorrow. Clarence had believed he would keep performing until his very last breath. Even in his old age, he planned to perform at the 2024 New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival as a final goodbye to the city that had watched him shine. But everything came to a halt after a back surgery that February, a surgery he insisted on just so he could stand tall on stage one more time. It seemed successful at first, but once he returned to his old villa in Algiers, his condition worsened. Post-surgery complications sent him back to the hospital and then home, in silence. He never walked out of that house again. On April 7, 2024, coinciding with Clarence's 87th birthday, police received a call from a neighbor who had noticed the lights inside had been left on for 3 nights straight, with no one going in or out. When they broke the door open, Clarence was found motionless in his old recliner, his head tilted toward the window overlooking Lake Pontchartrain. In his hand was a crumpled sheet of paper, a letter never sent, with trembling words that read, "If I'm gone, play But I Do in my real voice. No need to smile anymore." No one was by his side, no emergency contact, no one came to claim his body. The medical report stated cause of death, natural. But those who saw it all understood. It was a death by abandonment. There was no funeral, no obituary, no tribute song replayed on the radio. The stations that once played his music through the 60s remained silent. The labels that profited from his voice issued no condolences. The 2-story villa where Clarence had lived for over half a century was sealed off, treated as an unclaimed asset. Rumors said he had hidden his original copyright contract behind the music room wall, but when police checked, the wall had already been hollowed out. No documents, no property deeds, no bank accounts under his name. All that remained was a wooden suitcase in the middle of the room. Inside were a few pages of handwritten music, never recorded. Clarence Frogman. Henry once made America laugh with his frog-like voice and cry with his soul-filled songs. But at the end of his life, he left this world with no one noticing. And the quiet question that lingers behind the rotting door of his lakeside villa is, who truly cares about an artist's legacy after he's gone? The lakeside villa where he lived for 58 years once bore a wooden sign carved by Clarence himself, Frogman's Home. His way of saying, "Here, I'm still me." But just days after his death, someone removed the sign. No one knows who. It was replaced with a cold metal plaque, painted in bold white letters, "Private property, keep out." The house was seized over a property dispute, registered under his ex-wife's name. The assets Clarence failed to protect at the end of his life were now openly listed on real estate auction sites. No one objected. No one stopped it. And so, a man who once brought all of New Orleans into the hearts of audiences worldwide couldn't even keep the home he called his own, couldn't keep a single child by his side at the end, couldn't even keep his name on the old wooden gate. Clarence didn't just die from age or illness, he died because piece by piece his life had been taken from him by the world, by love, by the very family he trusted most. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy. He didn't die forgotten. He died in the bitter indifference of those who should have loved him most. When Clarence died, only 2 middle-aged fans drove nearly 200 miles to lay a bouquet of wildflowers at the front steps. They weren't allowed inside. No one came out to greet them. The villa was locked, curtains worn and frayed, and the framed photo of him with the Beatles faced the wall. All that remained of a life that once had America singing along. was a handwritten melody, never recorded, tucked away in a moldy wooden suitcase. The old piano was still there, warped from flooding, the third key missing, like his voice, a silence no one could replace. But the most haunting part was the wall behind the piano, where Clarence once hid a master contract and an unreleased tape. After his passing, that wall was found hollowed out. No documents. No one knew when they were taken. The only person who ever had a key to that music room was his fifth wife, the one he once loved deeply, but later divorced after a bitter financial dispute. She was the only one who visited him weeks before he passed. The police said nothing, but the rumors never stopped. Some swore they saw her car parked outside Clarence's house that very night, disappearing before dawn. But no one had proof. No one dared say more. And no one came forward to claim what was left of his estate. Clarence Frogman. Henry had once been called a joke, a novelty act, a croaking voice on a grand stage. But to many, he was the soundtrack of their childhood, the soul of New Orleans, the man who sang their loneliness out loud when no one else dared to. And now, the house where he lived and died has become a forsaken relic, unrecognized, unprotected, unloved. His legacy was sold off, his papers taken, his music room violated. And in the end, the man who once made America laugh and cry couldn't even keep the things that mattered most. So tell us, what do you think was Clarence Frogman Henry's biggest mistake? Was it trusting too easily or smiling too often while bleeding inside? Was it placing his faith in love 7 times over, or simply living too truthfully in a world built on lies? Leave your thoughts in the comments about Clarence, about the loneliness behind the spotlight, and about the dreams the world has forgotten. And if you want to keep uncovering the stories hidden behind the curtain, make sure to subscribe. There are still many abandoned houses waiting for you to walk through, and many untold stories waiting to be heard.